"You're fired for helping a veteran." "Disgraceful," Richard shouted. Jack stood silent, scissors still in hand. He'd just given a free haircut to a struggling Vietnam veteran. Little did his boss know, 30 minutes later, everything would change forever. Jack Thompson was a 65-year-old barber who had worked at Richard's barbershop for over 8 years. Unlike many men his age enjoying retirement, Jack still worked 6 days a week, standing on his feet for hours, doing what he loved most, cutting hair and connecting with people. Before becoming a civilian barber, Jack had served 20 years in the Army, where he'd been a military barber, grooming soldiers who were heading into combat or attending important ceremonies. His skilled hands had prepared countless men for both battle and glory. When Jack left the service at 45, his family had pushed him to pursue something more substantial than barbering. His brother, a successful banker, had even offered to get him a position at his firm. "You're too old to be starting over as a barber," his brother had said. "Banking is where the real money is." But Jack followed his heart. Cutting hair wasn't just a skill for him, it was his calling. He loved the conversations, the transformations, and most of all, the smiles when someone looked in the mirror and saw themselves renewed. The small town of Riverdale had embraced Jack from the moment he arrived. Most residents preferred waiting an extra hour just to have Jack cut their hair rather than letting the other barbers at Richard's shop attend to them. It wasn't just Jack's expertise with scissors that won people over. It was his warm smile, his attentive ear, and the way he remembered every client's family stories. "Jack makes you feel like you're the most important person in the world," Mrs. Peterson often said after bringing her grandson in for his monthly haircut. For veterans who visited the shop, Jack was more than a barber. He was a brother. He could spot a military man from a mile away and would often share quiet conversations about experiences that civilians could never understand. Many local veterans confided that their time in Jack's chair was more therapeutic than their VA appointments. Richard, the shop's owner, had always been aware that Jack was his most valuable employee, the one who brought in most of the business. Yet Richard's focus remained squarely on the bottom line. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills," he often said, counting the day's earnings while Jack swept the floor each evening. One crisp autumn morning, Jack was heading to open the barbershop when he decided to stop at Frank's coffee stand just down the street. The morning air was chilly, and Jack figured a hot cup would make the perfect start to his day. As he waited for his coffee, Jack noticed an elderly man standing nearby, dressed in a tattered jacket with military patches. The man's white beard was unkempt, and his hair stuck out wildly from beneath a faded Vietnam veteran cap. Despite his disheveled appearance, the man stood with the unmistakable posture of someone who had once served. "Morning, soldier," Jack called out. "Army or Marines?" The elderly man looked surprised, then straightened slightly. "Marines, 3rd Battalion, 1975. "You serve?" "Army, 25 years, Jack replied with a smile. "Name's Jack." "Marcus Wilson, Captain, retired," the man said, extending a weather hand. Everyone in town knew Marcus's story. He'd returned from Vietnam decorated but damaged both physically and mentally. Soon after, his wife had left him, unable to cope with his nightmares and mood swings. Over the years, Marcus had struggled to hold down jobs, eventually living off his modest military pension and occasional odd jobs around town. "Join me for coffee?" Jack offered, already signaling to Frank to make a second cup. "Don't want to impose," Marcus replied, leaning heavily on his cane. "Nonsense. One veteran to another," Jack insisted. "Besides, we need to do something about that beard of yours. It's looking a bit wild, Captain." As they walked a short distance to the barbershop, the two men talked about their service days. Jack noticed how Marcus's eyes lit up when speaking about his time as an officer, before the hardships of civilian life had worn him down. When they reached the barbershop, Jack unlocked the door and flipped the sign to "Open." "Why don't you come by later today?" Jack suggested. "I'll give you a proper cut and shave on the house. Could help with that job interview you mentioned." Marcus hesitated. "That's mighty generous, but—" "No buts," Jack interrupted. 2 o'clock. I'll keep a chair open." At precisely 2 o'clock, Marcus pushed open the barbershop door, the bell announcing his arrival. Jack was just finishing up with a customer, but gestured to the waiting area with a smile. "Take a seat, Captain. Be with you in 5. Jack called out. The shop was busy that afternoon, with 2 other barbers working alongside Jack. When he finally finished with his client, Jack beckoned Marcus to his chair. With practiced movements, Jack draped the barber's cape around Marcus's shoulders and secured it at the neck. "How about we start with a proper shave, then move on to the haircut?" Jack suggested, already preparing his straight razor and hot towels. Marcus nodded, visibly relaxing as Jack reclined the chair. "Been a long time since I had a professional shave." Just as Jack was applying a hot towel to Marcus's face, the shop's door opened and Richard walked in. The owner rarely made appearances before closing time, usually only showing up to collect the day's earnings. Jack noticed Richard's eyes narrow at the sight of Marcus in the chair. For the next 30 minutes, Jack worked meticulously, transforming Marcus's appearance with careful snips of his scissors and precise strokes of his razor. The other customers and barbers occasionally glanced over, amazed at the transformation taking place. Beneath the unkempt exterior was emerging a distinguished, handsome veteran. When Jack finally spun the chair around to face the mirror, Marcus stared at his reflection in disbelief. "I haven't looked this good since my wedding day," he said, voice thick with emotion. "How much do I owe you, Jack?" Before Jack could answer, Richard stepped forward from where he'd been watching silently. "That'll be $45, Richard stated coldly. "Haircut and straight razor shave." Jack turned to his boss. "Richard, I told the captain it was on the house." One veteran to another. Richard's face flushed. "On the house? This is a business, not a charity." "I know, and I'm happy to cover it. Take it from my pay," Jack replied calmly. "Absolutely not," Richard snapped. "Either he pays or you're fired." The shop fell silent. Customers and barbers alike froze, watching the confrontation unfold. "Sir, I can try to pay," Marcus began, reaching for his worn wallet. Jack placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Put that away, Captain. You earned this and more." Turning to Richard, Jack's expression hardened. "If that's how it is, then I guess I'm fired." Richard pointed to the door. "Out, now, and don't expect a reference." As Marcus left the barbershop, he was visibly upset despite his fresh haircut and clean-shaven face. Outside, several townspeople noticed his distress and approached him. "Captain Wilson, is everything all right?" asked Sarah from the bakery next door. Marcus shook his head. "Jack just got fired because of me. He gave me a free haircut, and his boss threw him out on the spot." "Jack? Fired?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "That's outrageous." Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered around Marcus as he explained what had happened. Among them was Bill Henderson, who owned the hardware store across the street. "That Richard has always been a cold one," Bill muttered. "But this crosses a line. Jack's been serving this community for years. And he served our country before that," added another bystander. "Unlike Richard, who's never done a selfless thing in his life." As Marcus continued sharing details, more people joined the growing crowd. Phones came out, calls were made, and social media posts quickly spread the news throughout the small town. "Someone should call General Carter," suggested Mrs. Peterson, who had arrived after hearing the commotion. "He and Jack served together years ago. He's in town for the Veterans Day Planning Committee." Almost immediately, someone in the crowd dialed the general's number. Inside the barbershop, Jack was silently gathering his personal tools, the scissors, combs, and razors he collected over decades of barbering. The other barbers watched uncomfortably, but none dared speak up against Richard, who was already interviewing walk-in applicants for Jack's position. Outside, the crowd had grown to over 30 people, including several local veterans who had hurried over after hearing the news. One of them, a former Army sergeant, made a quick call to the local VFW hall, where many veterans were gathering for their weekly meeting. "You won't believe what just happened to Jack Thompson," he explained to commander of the local post. "We need to do something." Within 30 minutes of Marcus leaving the barbershop, the news had reached nearly every corner of Riverdale, including the temporary office of Brigadier General David Carter, who immediately put down his paperwork and reached for his phone. Jack was just placing his folded barber's cape into his duffel bag when a bell above the door chimed loudly. He looked up to see a remarkable sight. Brigadier General David Carter, dressed in his full military uniform adorned with medals and ribbons, walking through the door. Behind him came Marcus, standing taller than before, and behind them streamed at least a dozen veterans of various ages, some in VFW caps, others wearing items indicating their service. The shop, which had been unnaturally quiet since Jack's firing, suddenly filled with the presence of military men and women standing at attention. Customers in mid-haircut stared in amazement. The other barbers froze with scissors in hand. Richard emerged from the back office, his irritated expression quickly shifting to surprise at the sight of so many people filling his shop. "What's going on here?" he demanded, then noticed the general's uniform and stars. His tone immediately softened. "Sir, welcome to our establishment. How can I help you?" General Carter ignored Richard completely and walked straight to Jack. The two men exchanged a crisp salute before embracing briefly. "Jack Thompson," the general said loudly enough for everyone to hear. 25 years of exemplary service to this country. Bronze Star recipient. The man who kept our unit looking sharp even in the worst conditions overseas. Richard paled slightly. "Sir, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," the general cut him off sharply. "You also had no idea that the act of kindness you punished is exactly what the military stands for. Taking care of our own." The general turned back to Jack. "Is it true you were terminated for providing a courtesy service to Captain Wilson here?" Jack nodded once. "Yes, sir." The general turned to face Richard, his posture straight and commanding. "In my 35 years of military service, I've encountered all types of people. Those who serve others, and those who serve only themselves." The shop remained silent as the general continued, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I came here today not just as Captain Wilson's former commanding officer, but as someone who recognizes honor when he sees it." He placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "And I see it here." Richard began to stammer. "General, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," the general stated firmly. "Your actions were perfectly clear." The general reached into his breast pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Jack, the veterans of this community have something for you." Jack accepted the envelope with a puzzled expression. "Open it," the general encouraged. Inside was a check for a substantial amount, along with a formal-looking document. Jack's eyes widened as he read it. "Sir, I don't understand," he said. "It's simple," the general explained, now addressing everyone in the shop. "For years, the veterans in this town have talked about opening our own barbershop, a place where service members can come for a haircut and find understanding, a place run by one of our own." He smiled at Jack. "We've been saving for the right opportunity, and it seems that opportunity has arrived." A round of applause broke out among the veterans and townspeople who had gathered inside and outside the shop. "This check represents our collective investment in you, Jack," the general continued. "And that document is a lease agreement for the vacant storefront 2 blocks down. The owner, a Navy veteran himself, has offered it at half the market rate." Jack stared at the papers in his hands, momentarily speechless. Finally, he looked up, his eyes glistening. "I don't know what to say, sir." "Say yes," Marcus chimed in, "and maybe hire an assistant. I may be old, but I can still sweep floors and make coffee." Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension. Richard, seeing the situation slipping completely beyond his control, attempted to salvage his reputation. "Jack, perhaps I was hasty. We could renegotiate your position here." "I believe that opportunity is past," the general interjected coolly. 3 months later, Veterans Cut and Shave opened its doors. The shop, decorated with military memorabilia donated by local veterans, quickly became not just a barbershop, but a community hub. Jack hired 2 young barbers, both military veterans using their GI Bill to attend barber college, and true to his word, gave Marcus a job as shop manager. Richard's barbershop, meanwhile, saw its business decline dramatically. Without Jack's loyal clientele and with the community's shift in allegiance, Richard eventually had to reduce his staff and work the chair himself, something he hadn't done in years. 1 year after the incident, Jack's shop was thriving. He had expanded to include a small coffee bar where veterans could gather and talk. On the wall hung a framed photograph of Jack's first day in business, with General Carter as his first official customer. And in a small ceremony attended by nearly half the town, the local Chamber of Commerce awarded Jack the Business of the Year award, not just for his success, but for creating a place of healing and community for veterans who had often felt forgotten. Richard, who had been forced to relocate his shop to a smaller location across town, wasn't present for the ceremony. The story of Jack Thompson's firing and subsequent success spread far beyond the boundaries of Riverdale. Local newspapers picked it up first, then regional news, and finally, a national veterans magazine featured Veterans Cut and Shave in a special issue about businesses serving the military community. Jack's shop became a model for similar establishments in other towns, with veterans reaching out for advice on starting their own community-centered businesses. The general, now retired and serving as a veterans advocate, often cited Jack's story in his speeches about the importance of supporting those who had served. For Marcus, the transformation was profound. The job gave him purpose and dignity he hadn't felt in decades. His apartment above the shop meant he no longer had to worry about making rent. Most importantly, he was surrounded daily by people who understood his experiences and valued his contributions. The impact extended beyond the veterans themselves. Community members began to develop a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made by service members. Schools organized field trips to the shop, where Jack and other veterans would share their stories and teach young people about service and respect. Richard, for his part, eventually sold what remained of his business and left town. The last anyone heard, he was working as an employee in a chain haircut establishment in the city, a humbling position for someone who had once been so focused on being the boss. The true lesson of Jack's story wasn't about revenge or comeuppance. It was about how communities can rally around their values when given a chance, and how respect for those who serve can translate into tangible support. As Jack often told customers who asked about the infamous day he was fired, "Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me. It reminded me that when you honor what's right, people stand with you." In a world where kindness is sometimes seen as weakness and profit often trumps principle, Jack's barbershop stands as a reminder that the measure of success isn't always found in a cash register, but in the lives touched and the community strengthened. If this story touched your heart, please comment respect below to show your appreciation for our veterans. How would you have reacted in Jack's situation? Subscribe for more stories that highlight the best of humanity.